Hi there and welcome to this week's vlog, and if you're a regular viewer of my vlogs you'll realise that I'm not in the usual place. That's because Sue and I are on holiday as I'm recording this. We're in the lovely county of Cheshire in England, and in particular we're staying in the beautiful town of Nantwich. It's a fascinating town, lovely place to visit and to use as our base for exploring the area. Nantwich has got a lot of lovely old buildings. There's black and white buildings from years gone by. I don't know how many centuries ago. I'm not really a historian, but it's just lovely, and it's one of those towns where they've got kind of unique shops, not just the same old shops you find in lots of cities and towns. So it's been great, and we've been able to explore the area. We've visited a few National Trust properties. And one of the things National Trust do well is bake scones, and we've been enjoying those. A day or two ago we went to a place called Mow Cop. Now if you know anything about Methodism you may well have heard of Mow Cop. In fact, Mow Cop was fairly close to where I began my life as a Methodist minister in the Potteries, Stoke-on-Trent. Now Mow Cop is a very significant place in the history of Methodism. In the year 1807, something called a camp meeting was held at Mow Cop. A camp meeting was a gathering of Christians and others to pray, to hear messages of encouragement from the scriptures, and people preaching, a time to worship, to sing praises to God, and thousands of people gathered. And that came about because two people in particular, called Hugh Bourne and William Clowes, had heard of a man called, let me just remember his name, Lorenzo Dow, from the United States. And camp meetings had been happening in the United States, and they'd really impacted many people. So Bourne and Clowes and others felt this is something we should do. So they went along to Mow Cop, gathered, as I say, lots and lots of people. So meeting in the open air, there were people preaching, people leading prayer, people leading worship, and it was a great success. So they thought, well, we'll do this again the following year. But the problem was that the powers that be in the then Methodist Church, or the Wesleyan Methodist Church, said, look, we don't want you to do this, we think it's unseemly, you shouldn't be out there in the open air preaching, you should do that in the proper place, in the chapels. But Clowes and Bourne and their colleagues thought, this is something really God's called us to do, so we need to carry on. And as a result of that, they were expelled from the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And to cut a long story short, that led to the foundation, the formation of the Primitive Methodist Church. Primitive Methodist because they believed they were going back to the primitive, the original teachings of Jesus and the early church. The Primitive Methodist Church had a great impact on society. They were very much involved in the founding of the trade union movement. They welcomed women preachers, which was something new in many ways. And so a new movement sprang up that really developed under God, and there's a real new move of the Spirit. And what I find exciting about that was that willingness to step out in faith, to get outdoors, to be where the people were, and to do something new, not to be hidebound by the rules and regulations. But the sad thing is that this happened not long after the death of John Wesley. And remember Wesley, when he was had his heartwarming experience in 1738, and he began to preach the gospel, his life was changed, and subsequently he was encouraged by George Whitefield to himself preach outside to the working people, the working, the miners and others. And Wesley thought, this is not something that's right, but eventually he was persuaded, and apparently for over 50 years Wesley preached out of doors, because often he was not allowed in the churches. The priests of the day wouldn't allow Wesley in because they didn't think that this new move of the Spirit was what they wanted in their church. Apparently Wesley's last open air sermon was preached Sorry about that. I'm just looking to see who's in the garden. It's my wife. Wesley's last open-air sermon was preached at the age of 87. That's that remarkable. And yet, only a few years after his death, the church had become staid again, set in its ways and unwilling to break out to do new things. And I wonder if that is really a challenge for us all. It's so easy to stick with what we're comfortable with, isn't it? Yet Jesus said, go into all the world. Jesus calls us, there's a great book, I can't remember what it's called. It's about stepping out of the boat. Look, if you want to change the world, if you want to do something really that God called you, sometimes you've got to step out of the boat. You've got to break out of your comfort zone. Not just so. The gospel, Jesus said, go and preach the gospel, not stay and wait for people to come like we so often do. So just going back to Maukop reminded me of that move of God. And my prayer is that God would continue to move us, to challenge us. I know in my own experience, I find it so much easier to stick with what I'm comfortable with. But so often God says, no, I want you to step out of the boat. I want you to do this new thing. And the big question for us, a challenge for us is, are we willing to step out of the boat, step out of our comfort zone, to do that new thing that God has called us to do, even if we don't feel equipped for it or we feel a bit embarrassed about it? Are we willing to listen to the voice of God, and then when we hear him, to be obedient? So that's my challenge for today. To me, and maybe it's something you need to think about too. I think we all do, don't we? Let's step out of the boat. Let's be willing to go where God calls us to go, to do what God calls us to do, and so fulfill his commission upon our lives. So God bless you. Thank you so much for listening today.